Hello and welcome. I have a packed lesson for you today, so I hope you're ready. I'm going to start out by talking about one of my very favorite features in After Effects, which are shape layers. Now, these are kind of like a little version of Illustrator in After Effects with a ton of cool animation possibilities. We've actually been using them this whole time already, but they're pretty deep, so there's definitely more that you need to know. Along the way, I'm going to introduce some completely new things that are really important, including a new keyframe type called hold keyframes, which I totally adore. Finally, we're going to talk a bunch about how to draw lines on screen so that they animate on and off. And this will lead us directly to an in-depth look at how to complete your next homework assignment, which is how to animate type written in script so that it looks like it's writing itself on. This is something that every motion designer has been asked to do at some point in their life, and also something with a bunch of pitfalls that can honestly be a big pain in the butt if you don't know how to do the right way. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff, and I don't want this to be too long, so let's jump right in. I'm going to start by talking about parametric shapes, which is just a fancy way of saying rectangles, rounded rectangles, ellipses, etc. So basically, I'm talking about these ones up here in this shape tool menu, right? We've talked about these a bunch of times. The hotkey is Q, okay? So if you have the rectangle tool selected and you press Q, you cycle down to the rounded rectangle. And then if you press Q again to the circle, and Q again, you get to the polygon shape. And then finally, Q again, you get to the star shape, okay? So those are all of our choices. Now, I really only basically use rectangle and ellipse, but let me go over these really quickly, right? So if I choose rectangle, now I have explained before that if I double click on this, I'll make a full screen of color, a 1920 by 1080 box, in this case because I'm in a 1920 by 1080 composition, right? But what I didn't explain is that if I hold Shift and double click on this, boop, boop, I will make a perfect square whose height is the size of my composition, okay? So that's pretty useful. And if I had chosen circle or ellipse up here and I had done that same thing where I held Shift and double clicked, I would have made a perfect circle that was 1080 high as well, okay? So we've definitely done this kind of thing before, and if we look here, we'll see that the shape layer has basically like these two folders in it, contents and transform, okay? The transform are the usual properties, but the contents is all the kind of fun shape layer stuff. Now I will say that it's much easier to look at and adjust all of that stuff up here in the properties panel, and I'll show you why. Basically, it's just because this is laid out really nicely here, whereas down here, if I wanted to get into my shape layer, I'd have to twirl this down, and if this was closed, I'd have to twirl this down, and then I'd have to twirl this down, and then I'd have to twirl this down, and finally I can adjust the size, right? Up here in the properties panel, that size is just totally there the whole time right away, and I could just say, make this 500 by 500 very easily, okay? Another thing that's cool about the properties panel is just say this is closed. Just say, I don't want to dig through all those menus and I just want to adjust the roundness here. So rectangles have roundness on them. I think I've explained this before, so I could dial this up and make kind of a rounded rectangle, okay? So anyway, if I want to just look at that property down in the timeline, I can double click on it up here in the properties panel, and now just that is open down here, huh? That's pretty cool. Another kind of cool trick about roundness, although this goes for any of those, if I double click on these, they'll all open up individually. The roundness, one thing, I think I've explained this before, but if I want this to be fully round, like a circle, or if I want to animate this from a rectangle or a square to a fully round circle, okay, I just need to animate the roundness to go from 0 to half of the height of the square in this case, okay? So 250, that would make it, boop, a perfect circle, right? So that's cool. So yeah, so we have all sorts of good things in here. We have stroke width that we can animate. We could animate the color of the stroke or the fill. This line cap and line join, I'm going to talk about in a second when we talk about something else, okay? But then we also have these shape transforms so that like we can move this individually. And we also have skew, which I've talked about before. And skew we don't really have anywhere else. And skew is useful. I did talk about it before, but for example, like if I choose Y for my pan behind tool and I move my shape layer anchor point kind of thing down to the bottom here, now I could animate skew like this, which is pretty cool. And honestly, I don't think there's any other way to animate that. So if you had the circle like rush in like from the side, you could then have like a little skew animation on it where it like bounces until it settles back down to 0 or whatever. So that's kind of fun, right? Yeah, so that's basically it for rectangle. We've really gone over this a whole bunch. Yeah, and same with circle. I mean, I think this is all pretty clear. If I delete my rectangle, If I shift and double click here, I'll make a perfect circle and I can adjust it and all that, okay? I think we've gone over circles and squares a whole bunch of times, right? I'm gonna delete this. Now, I don't think there's any point in adding rounded rectangle because you already have the roundness on the rectangle, okay? So I mostly just use circle and square, but also polygon tool can occasionally be useful. So let me show you what I use that for, right? And that is for making a triangle, okay? So if I shift and double click on this to make it defaults to being a 5-sided pentagon, okay? And by the way, the star tool and the polygon tool, you can basically toggle between them here. So again, you don't really need to use the star tool, I don't think. You could just use the polygon tool and then change it to the star tool. In any case, I'll go over that next. So if I'm making a triangle, obviously I just set the number of points down to 3, okay? And then I can change the outer radius and, make this whatever I want. So yeah, that's pretty cool. That's the way to make a triangle, which at some point was much less clear, but I think now in After Effects that's easier. So if I wanted to animate this, for example, from a triangle to a different polygon, like just say I wanted to make an octagon, like a stop sign or something, I could animate it by making a stopwatch here for the points and then just easily changing this to 8, right? And, well, I guess I'd need to kind of rotate this 22.5 degrees, I think. Yeah, and then it would look like that. But yeah, so you could easily animate one polygon shape to become another, all right? And then finally, let me just quickly show you how you could make a star, okay? So you could either do it that way, or for whatever reason, if you really want to, you could do it this way by choosing the star tool, okay? I guess that defaults to a nicer star. Now, I should say I rarely ever make stars anymore, but when I used to work in political advertising, I used to have to make stars all the time because it's like part of the American flag, right? So I don't like this default shape for an American flag kind of star. What I would do is pull this down so that this inner radius makes these more straight here, okay? And that looks to me more like an American flag kind of a star, I guess if it was white or whatever, right? Yeah, in any case, yeah, that's an overview of the shape tool. Shape layers are awesome. I love them, and I'm definitely hoping that this all makes a lot of sense based on what we've talked about already. Here's something that we went over once, but bears repeating quickly, as this will be important in your homework, which is masking a shape layer. Yeah, so this is a bit confusing because this shape tool is responsible for both making shapes and for making masks in After Effects, okay? Now the solution is very simple, and we've definitely gone over this before, but let me just take you through this again, all right? So if I have my rectangles tool selected and I have a layer selected, okay, and I go to try to make a mask of this, and I haven't pressed this button here where tool creates mask, okay? What I'll do is I'll make another shape on this shape layer, and that is not what I want. Though it's important to notice that you can actually put multiple shapes on one shape layer, but we'll talk about that later, okay? I'm gonna undo this. So again, if I want to mask this shape with this rectangle tool, I just need to press this button, tool creates mask, and now I can mask this, okay? And I can animate the mask, right? Just wanted to talk about that again really quickly. Let's talk about After Effects shape layers versus Illustrator layers for one moment. Now, we went over some of this a little bit when I discussed the difference between Photoshop and Illustrator layers, but it's worth bringing back to talk about a few additional things. Okay, so here I have this Illustrator circle that I made in Illustrator and I imported, okay? And if we look at this, all the options that I have for animation are just the standard transforms, okay? And we can see this up here in the properties panel as well. Position, scale, rotation, and opacity. So if that's all I ever want to do is just move the circle around, make it a little bit bigger, smaller, or have it, get lighter or whatever it is, okay, I can do that with these transforms. But if I want more animation options, right, what I would want to do is, and I've definitely showed you this before in that lesson when I talked about Illustrator and Photoshop, okay, is right click on this and go to create and create shapes from vector layer, okay? And as we went over before, when I do that, it turns my Illustrator layer off and it turns this on, which is an exact recreation of that, but as a shape layer, as an internal After Effects shape layer, right? It's got the little star here, so you can see that it's a shape layer, right? Additionally, it's got a lot more going on here, right? It's got this contents menu with all this stuff in it, and it's got the regular transform. So let's look at this here in the properties panel because it's just so much easier, as we were just talking about, right? So I've got the regular transforms, but also now I can animate the color, I can animate the stroke or make it thicker or thinner or a different color. I can animate the fill color, I have all these same things, including skew, that are so useful, right? So that's good. If you ever need to animate an Illustrator layer, this is a fine way to go, okay? But actually, making it whole cloth in After Effects gives you a few more options that I think make it even better, okay? So I remember making this in Illustrator, and I remember it's a 500 by 500 circle, okay? So if I turn this off and I go back over here and I choose my ellipse tool and I shift and double click on this to make a full circle, okay, well, yeah. So let me take the stroke off, right? And now let me make this 500 by 500, okay? So now it's really the exact same size. It's a different color, right? But it's the same size as this original one. So now let's look at the difference between this and the outlines that I created, all right? So this has, under contents, it has ellipse, okay? And under contents, this has group, all right? So the ellipse, if I twirl this down now, the size is, I have a size. I have 500 by 500, okay? So that's really useful. But under here, in the one that I created by making outlines from the Illustrator shape, under here, I have a path, okay? And what that means is, this is, actually, let me turn this on and turn the other off, okay? This is like points, okay? 4 points with Bezier handles on it that are pulled perfectly and set perfectly so they form a circle, okay? So I could change this and animate this, but it's really limited in terms of like what I can do. And also, if I set this and then later on I realize, oh shoot, I need this to animate back to a circle and I can't just like undo that, I will never get that shape back to a circle, okay? That's pretty much impossible, okay? But here with my shape layer, it is not, okay? Because I have values here, which just makes it much easier. I can unchain this and I can make an ellipse like this, or I could squinch this down even to like something like this, right? And animate that out. Like maybe I'm animating an eye and it's like opening or something, right? I could do that all very easily. And then if I want, I can always make it a circle just by clicking this back to 500 by 500, so I can animate that back to a circle, okay? So I just think that making these parametric shapes here in After Effects gives you the most possible options, though you can create vectors in After Effects in other ways, like by making it in Illustrator and then creating outlines. I just think making them in After Effects gives you the most options. And either way, you have this wonderful thing, which we haven't really talked about too much, which is the Add menu. Ah yes, the old Add menu, home of so many useful things, including the most useful thing, which is trim paths. But it's not yet time to talk about trim paths. Okay, let's go over a couple of things about the Add menu that I really like, all right? So if we twirl this down and we see our contents, this is the Add menu right here, okay? So first of all, you could add like a group in here, which would be kind of like creating like a little folder, right? So you could like drop your rectangle into that like little folder and put other shapes into this group, for example, if you want to make a compound path or something. I'm gonna undo that, okay? So you could also like add a stroke or a fill to this shape if it didn't have one, for example. We're probably not gonna do anything like this, okay? The things that I think are really fun and important in here are merge paths is really important. Trim paths is hugely important. We're going to talk about those two today a bunch. And then there are ones in here that are kind of fun that do things like kind of distort shapes. So let's talk about pucker and bloat for 1 sec. And we can also talk about like zigzag maybe. All right, so pucker and bloat, you know, makes, I'm going to press Shift Command H and turn my layer handles off. Okay, so here's what pucker and bloat does. To a square in any case, right? It can make shapes like this, which is sort of fun. And always very symmetrical, and you can kind of back it up and make shapes like this, right? So yeah, that could be like a really great shape that you might need to make one day, some kind of thing like this, okay? So you could use pucker and bloat to do that, right? Again, not something that I find terribly useful, but something that you can definitely do, okay? So that's pucker and bloat. Zigzag, pretty cool as well. Like this gives you this kind of size, ridges per segment, and points, which you can make smooth usually. And then you could kind of like, I don't know, move this up and make this like this or something. I don't know. There's probably like always feel like you could make a postage stamp kind of a shape if you did this just the right way, though I don't know exactly what those settings would be, right? So that's zigzag. Again, sometimes very, very useful, but not really the kind of thing that I use a bunch, right? So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff in the add menu that's like that. The repeater is occasionally useful. Round corners I find to be completely not useful because there's already a rounded rectangle and you could just animate the roundness. Twist does like this, which, maybe if you wanted to make this guy dance just like a little bit, that would be like kind of like really amazing, actually. Hello. Anyway, yeah, if you ever need to do that, twist, okay? Well, I definitely cracked myself up a little bit with that twist animation there. I'm a pretty silly guy, as you might have noticed. Anyway, I need to mention two things in the add menu because they are both useful and important. I'm talking about merge paths and trim paths. So something that's important, but which I haven't mentioned yet, is that you can put multiple shapes on one shape layer, okay? So if I have my ellipse tool selected and I have a layer selected that I already have shapes on, I can add more shapes to this, right? I sort of talked about this when I talked about masking, okay? But a cool thing about this is that combined with merge paths, okay, I can make some really awesome compound shapes in After Effects that I otherwise wouldn't really be able to make, okay? So select your layer or select the contents menu, but to put merge paths on, you do not want to select one of your individual shapes, okay? You want to select contents or the top level here, and then add merge paths, okay? And then that puts that below these folders. If I selected this and added merge paths, it would add it into this folder here, which I do not want, okay? So I'm gonna undo that. So now, right away you can see what the merge paths is doing. It is merging these paths, okay? And they're still all like live shapes, so if I select like my ellipse here, I can still like move this around, okay, and create like live shapes, right? I mean, it is live shapes still, right? So I can create whatever shape I want this way, okay? Now, the merge path defaults to add, but you can also have it, for example, set to subtract. And then basically whichever ellipse is on top, the other ones will be subtracted from that. So this is my main ellipse here, ellipse 1. So if I move this up to the top, now the other two will be taken out of that, okay? So that's pretty cool. And merge paths, you can also do intersect, which doesn't really work with 3 shapes. So if I were to like get rid of like my second ellipse here, you could see that the intersect is happening here, right? So then I could still like adjust this and change this shape and make it like whatever I wanted. But this actually allows you to make some really cool shapes that otherwise it would kind of be hard to make, I think, in any other case. Like here I've kind of made almost like an eye shape, like an almond eye shape or something. So yeah, so that's kind of cool. Merge paths is definitely something I urge you to experiment with and check out on your own. So one tool that we really haven't talked about too much yet is the pen tool. And the pen tool has a bunch of awesome uses in After Effects. We use it for masking and shape layers for sure, but it's also awesome for creating lines and strokes. So first of all, I should mention that the hotkey for the pen tool is G. Okay, so when I press G, I get my pen tool. Now, I think the reason why it's not P, like in Photoshop and Illustrator, is because P is all about the position property. Okay, so that was more important than P being the pen tool, I guess. All right, now the important thing about the pen tool to remember is that you can create kind of open paths or closed paths with the pen tool, but they'll still be shapes. Okay, so for example, I could kind of make like a rectangle kind of thing here with my pen tool just by clicking these points, right? And then you see when I hover over the last point here, I get that little circle next to my pen. That means when I click in this, I will be completing the path, okay? So now this is a closed path, and it really doesn't make any particular difference. You can still do all the same things. You can change the stroke weight or change the color. You can also turn the stroke weight off, by the way, and put a fill color in here, or like choose a solid color and put a fill in there. So it's not like you could just make like a stroke with the pen tool or something, okay? Let me undo that. And so yeah, so I mean, basically I have all the same things. This is a shape layer, okay? You can tell by the star. And you've got your contents menu and all this. Now, what you have here is a path, okay? Because I made this with points. So this is like that circle that we converted from Illustrator just a moment ago where I had 4 points and Beziers in it, okay? So I know we've been over path animation before, but just to kind of go over this again. So like the marquee in the arrow's journey, that was a path animation, okay? So what we were able to do is make a path keyframe, and then animate this. In that case, we did something like this or whatever, but in reverse, where this like opened out like this, right? Okay, so path animation is really fun, and you can use this to create essentially like cell animation in After Effects. So pen tool can be like really useful, but I gotta say that I mostly use the pen tool for making lines and stuff. So let me get rid of this, okay, and let me show you how I would do that. Let me take my fill off, okay, and just ramp this up to like 10 or something on the stroke. Cool. So let me make a line here. I don't know, I'm just kind of making this up as I go, but I'm gonna try to make some nice round corners just because I'm that sort of person, okay? And actually, what I'm gonna do is make a sharp corner here as well. And let me dial up the stroke width here because I wanna show, I promised I would talk about line cap and line join at the beginning of this lesson. So basically the default here is that the line cap is square and not round. And I generally prefer round, so I usually click this on, okay? Especially when we're doing your homework, hint, hint, I would definitely use this. I think it's way better. And then right now here, you can see that this is like kind of a sharp edge right here, because I've got this line join on, which is miter, okay? But if I press round, this can become a nice like rounded edge there as well. So I really like round line cap and round line join almost always, okay? I'm gonna actually delete this point out now. Great. So let me demo a couple things here that we've got in the contents menu that are only for strokes, okay? So, or for lines. So in the stroke menu, there's a lot of stuff in here, but also there's these three things down here: dashes, taper, and wave. And I'm gonna say that of these, dashes is the oldest, and taper and wave are kind of newer, and I don't really use these that much. I'll demo them for you really quick, but dashes I find more useful, taper and wave less so, okay? Because I'm rarely like illustrating something here in After Effects, but whatever. Okay, so dashes is pretty cool. Basically, if I press this button here, this plus button, now it's giving me a dash, but it's really hard to tell, okay? But what I wanna do is like, make the dashes much bigger or make them smaller, okay? So now you see I've got, because this is rounded, in the line join and the line cap, now I've kind of got these like hot dog shapes that just kind of, are here moving along my path, and I can just move those using offset. So that's like really fun. If you ever need to make something like that, that's super cool. Another thing you could do with dashes is press this plus again, right? And then you can get a dash and a gap. And this is more like in Illustrator. Okay, so if I make a really big gap, but then I dial my dash down to like 0, I can have like basically little dots here, and I can make them closer or farther, and then I could move those across here as well. So that's kind of a cool thing that I've never actually used that, but I sort of love it, and I think it's really fun, okay? You can also make more traditional dashes, like a dashed line, by setting the stroke width back down to something more normal, like 10, okay? And then I can make these longer, and then make the gap like shorter or whatever. And then here, if I press Shift Command H to turn my layer handles off, maybe I should actually make this something like white. It would be easier to see. Okay, now I can see I've got these dashes here, and I can make them smaller or larger, or kind of animate them. And then I could use this offset to kind of move them around on this path as well. And I should say that this path, is still live, okay? So if I wanted to like decide that I wanted to add some more points onto there, I could, and then there would be dashes on there, right? I'll undo that, all right? So dashes are really cool, and I'm just gonna turn that off now, all right? So taper, let's talk about taper 1 sec, and let me make this a little bit thicker, okay? This will be easier to see. So taper, you've got your start length, right, which gives you something like this, and then you've got your end length, which gives you kind of something like this. And so you can make like tapered strokes this way. I find that it doesn't give me the amount of control that I want. Like in Illustrator, I can go through for each of my points and decide the width right then and there. This kind of gives me like a start and an end, but I don't find this is like terribly useful as an interface myself, but you can make tapered strokes if you want. Now, another thing that you could do here is this wave, which is something I really don't use ever, but is kind of cool, okay? So you can kind of make like organic lines this way by changing this wavelength, I feel like. And then you could change the amount as well, and then the phase, and have this kind of like move like this, which is sort of interesting if I ever needed to do this. This looks very like, like intestinal or something to me, I don't know. Okay, so we are finally ready to talk about one of my very favorite things in After Effects now, which is the awkwardly named but supremely useful trim paths. Yes, okay, so trim paths is amazing, right? Here I have a line, okay, and if I want this to draw itself on screen, just say starting over here and going through there, this is otherwise a very difficult thing to do in After Effects. I could like make a mask and try to animate this with a mask and then add more points and go around the corner and then animate the straightaway with the mask and then add more mask points and like go around this corner and then animate this straightaway, add more points, etc., etc. But I'd wind up with a ton of keyframes and a ton of mask points, and it would be very hard to even actually ensure that that was moving at a steady rate. Okay, I'd have to do it all by eye. That would be a nightmare, okay? This is why trim paths exists, and I'm so happy about this, okay? So if I select my layer, I go down here into my add menu, finally, we can go to trim paths, okay? And this is very easy to learn. I'm gonna Shift Command H and just turn my layer handles off for 1 sec, okay? So trim paths, basically it gives you a start and an end and an offset, and that's pretty much it, okay? So the way that I built this is I started this path here and I built it this way, okay? So in this case, because I built this as the start here, this refers to the beginning here, and the end refers to the end, okay? If I had started stroking this way and built it this way, it would be the opposite, okay, but I didn't, all right? So what that means is, finally, is that I could take end, which right now is here, and at 100%, and I can roll this back. Oh yeah, now you can see what this is doing. It's just stroking this line on. And the best thing about it is, okay, I can do this with 2 keyframes. I could make an end keyframe at 0 and then move forward in time and make an end keyframe at 100, set my work area there, and boom, it is just gonna write that out, okay? I can adjust this by separating these. I can add ease on here, whatever I want, done, right? It's so simple. Trim paths is amazing. And again, this is still a live line, okay? So if I turn my layer handles back on and, you know, I selected a different point, I could edit this here, and then I could like put this here and make, you know, another whole animation here. It's like, oh, I want this to go farther or whatever it is. I can do all that, you know, here, and then the trim paths is still going to just pick all that up, okay? So it's a live path that's being trimmed. It's super nice and super useful. We now have to make a little bit of a left turn and talk about 2 brand new things that I want to introduce you to. Both are different, and both are important, and both are in your homework. One is track mats, and the other is hold keyframes, which I mentioned at the top of this lesson. I'm going to start with the hold keyframes because I love them, and also because they're pretty easy to understand. So have you ever wanted to make an animation like this, okay, where an object doesn't animate between things, but instead just stays in one place and then changes all of a sudden to another place and then changes all of a sudden to another place, okay? Well, if so, you have been dreaming about hold keyframes, okay? So here we go. Hold keyframes look kind of like this. They're sort of squared off, okay? And the way that you make them is you can make them a couple different ways, okay? So if I select these, first of all, to turn these back to linear, I would just Command and click on here, okay? Now to make these into hold keyframes in the first place, okay, all I would have to do is either Control and click on this and open this menu, okay? Then I could see here, toggle hold keyframe. Now, the word toggle is a bit obscure. I'm not quite sure why they have it there, but that just means turn on and off, okay? So this is like turn on hold keyframes, turn these into hold keyframes, all right? So when I click this, yes, these become hold keyframes. And then just to show this again, if I right click on this, I can toggle them off again that way. I think that's why it's a toggle. I don't know. Toggle's a really weird word to me. In any case, there's a keyboard shortcut kind of thing. It's Option and Command and click on here, and then you can make these into hold keyframes, okay? So hold keyframes, just in case it's not clear, they will hold one value until they reach another keyframe, and then they will change all at once, okay? So if we get in a little bit closer here, you can see that this value here, okay, this is 150X and 138Y, okay? And there's no animation between here. This space between the keyframes, which we talked about so much last week, is now, there's nothing happening here. In fact, if we look at this in the speed graph, you'll see that it's just all at 0 the whole time because there's no motion, all right? It just starts here, then it moves there all at once, then it moves there all at once, then it moves there all at once. It holds this value till it reaches the next keyframe, and then when it reaches it, it changes all at once. And then this one holds this value this whole time until it gets to this keyframe, and then it changes all at once, okay? And you could have like a mixture of hold and non-hold keyframes in an animation like this for whatever reason, right? So it's like mostly holding and then moving or whatever you want, okay? But that's hold keyframes, and we're gonna use them in this class now a bunch more times, but definitely in your homework, so I needed to introduce them to you right now. We are ready to move on to track mats now, and I promise you, this is the last new thing that I need to demonstrate. Okay, so I just needed to talk about one technical thing for 1 second, which I actually have talked about before, but it was in the bonus rendering video, so I don't know if that counts or not, okay? And that is basically that video consists of 4 channels, okay? Red, green, blue, RGB, and then there's an alpha channel, okay? And the alpha channel deals with transparency or opacity, okay, which are both 2 different ways of saying the same thing. So for example, right now this has a transparent background, and I could render this out, right? And the render would know the difference between the transparent background and this layer here, because this has opacity, this has an opaque background, and everything else is transparent, okay? This is a different way of saying that basically most layers in After Effects are fully opaque, okay? And so you can use them as what's known as a track matte, okay? So for example, I have this photo of myself right here, okay? And I look pretty goofy in that photo. By the way, this was taken by Jean Lafitte. Thank you so much, Jean. And this photo, if I want to have it appear just inside of this square, in other words, if I want this photo to use the alpha information of this square and this square only, I can do that with a track matte, okay? So if I move this over here, right now it's not doing it, but what I could do is go down here, and you see how there's a track matte right here, okay? Well, if yours doesn't have this, okay, you might need to go down here, and this button might not be pressed, okay? So if this button is not blue, then go ahead and press that, and now you should get your track matte, okay? So now check this out. I've got this pull down menu and a pick whip here, okay? The pull down menu is very easy. If I pull this down and I set the null layer to square, boop, now that photo will be contained within essentially the square or the alpha information of that square, right? So yeah, and what's cool about this is I can move the photo and the square will stay there, or I could move the square, okay, independently. And that's different than with a mask, because if you remember, if I have no matte on here and I make a mask using the rectangle tool up here on this, right, I hold down on Shift, oops, I just made another rectangle by accident. I'm always making that error. But if I made a mask here on here, a square mask, okay, now this mask is connected to this layer. No matter where I move the layer, the mask moves. And if I wanted to move it without moving the mask, I'd have to like animate the mask to stay in the same position. It'd be really annoying, okay? So track matte is way better generally for anything like this than mask, okay? Because it's just more adjustable and it's more animatable, all right? So there, I mean, there's more to tell you about track mattes. Like for example, like I could invert the matte, right? Or here I could use, instead of an alpha matte, I could switch this to a luma matte, which is very advanced. I don't think we ever need to do anything like this, but would use the black and white values of the original layer, not the photo, but the original layer, to determine the transparency. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in here, but I just wanted to basically mention this just a little bit here, and to mention this pick whip, which looks a lot like the parenting pick whip and the expression properties pick whip. So you want to be kind of careful, but basically you could use this pick whip in place of this pull down menu, right? So if this was not matted, I could pick whip up here and then it'd be matted. And by the way, it turns the square off. It assumes you don't want to use that, but you could also have this square on and then, for example, use a blending mode like multiply to make the photo look like that. So yeah, track mattes are really cool and they'll bring up a lot of things for us. Definitely start to play with them in After Effects. We're gonna use them a bunch in your homework in the most basic way, which is essentially just to fill one layer in to another layer. Okay, we have finally reached the part of the lesson where I can start to bring it all together. Okay, so we are really close now to me being able to demo what we're gonna do in your homework for you, but I did kind of want to ease into this a little bit and just show you an example first of how I could use track mats and trim paths to draw this tapered stroke on screen, okay? So imagine that I've been given this as an Illustrator layer, okay, from a client, and they really want to see this right on. And this isn't a shape that I can easily make in After Effects here, even though I've got a tapered stroke, but whatever. So this is something that I'm going to need to animate a different way, okay? So you might be saying, well, why don't you just go ahead and like create shapes from the vector layer and animate those, right? Okay, so nah, because the way this actually looks is I've got that path. It's not kind of what maybe you were thinking it would be, which is like a line down the middle, and this is just thinner and thicker where it needs to be. Nah, it's got all these points. So this is actually would be really difficult to animate. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that and turn this back on, okay? So let me show you a better method that involves, like I said, trim paths and track mats, all right? So what I'm gonna do first is deselect this and grab my pen tool, and okay, I've got a 10-point stroke here. And what I wanna do is make a shape layer on top of this where I kind of just trace over this, okay? So let me do that first. And sometimes it can be difficult to get just the exact right curves, but you know, you keep fiddling with it and you'll get it right, okay? So something like this here, and basically you just want to try to make a line that's going, or what I want to do is make a line that's sort of going down the middle of this, roughly, okay? So yeah, like that, great. And so now what I want to do now is extend the stroke pixel value so that this actually covers the entire thing like that, okay? And additionally, I want to set this to round cap over here, okay? So that I have a round edge on this. Great. And let me call this my mat, just so it's fully clear, okay? And I always have the capital A there by accident. So if I take my stroke now and I track mat to the mat, boop, now it looks the same as it did before, okay? Because it's fully being filled in by the alpha information of this. This is like my photo now, okay? That's being filled into that square, right? So what that means is I can go up here to my mat and go to add and go to trim paths, okay? And now, as you might be getting this right now, I could dial the end back, right? And this will now be drawing itself on in a very nice way with a nice rounded edge there, okay? And the taper is all accounted for, right? So what I would do is move a few frames and make an end keyframe, move just say 30 frames for 1 second, set this to 100, okay? And now this looks like this, right? And that's very cool and very nice and only has 2 keyframes. So I could easily, you know, put some ease on here and adjust this however I wanted, right? I could take this into the graph and make it work however I wanted, all right? So that's the basic method here, okay? So you're like, oh, all right, I get that. That's not too bad. Okay, well, it's not too bad. But what about something like this? Okay, what happens if you have a shape like this? Okay, and essentially a shape that crosses over itself, okay? So this adds some pitfalls in here. Okay, so what are those pitfalls? All right, well, the pitfall is that it crosses over itself and it makes it a little bit difficult. So let me show you this. You basically would animate this the same way, okay, but then adjust it later, right? So I'm gonna grab my pen tool or G and kind of quickly trace this. I wanna set this back to something more like 15 or whatever. Okay, and go here and trace this shape, okay? So I'm gonna try to do this with as few points as I can, but I always mess this up. So here, let me just put one here. Okay, and put one here, and here, and here. Okay, and then here, I guess. Did it okay this time? Yeah, woohoo! And then here. All right, great. So that's roughly good. What I'm gonna do is just go ahead now and make this thicker, right? So it covers all those points. It covers the whole thing, and I'm going to make this rounded edge, okay? So now I'll take my stroke 2, and I'm gonna track mat pick whip up to shape 1. And so now it looks like this. My shape layer has disappeared, okay? But this is fully being filled in now, okay? Let me go ahead and call this my mat. And I'm gonna now add a trim paths to this. Great. So now, here's what happens. If I squirrel my end back down to 0, it would animate like this, right? So this is unfortunate. And what this is, so because this is a variable thickness line, okay? The thickness of the mat has to be as thick as the thickest part, okay? So that is here revealing the edges of the thickness of this mat, okay? So basically what I have to do is get in here and mask this off, okay? And then animate it in the right way so that when the trim paths comes around and it hits there, the masks go away, okay? So let me first make these masks, okay? And I have to do these on the mat layer, okay? Not on the thing that's filling into the mat, okay? So the mat layer, and because this is a shape layer, I need to press this button, and remember to press that button every time to make these masks, okay? So let me do this now. I'm gonna try to kind of skim across here and make something that's very, very close to the original curve of this shape, okay? So something like this, maybe, okay? You wanna be pretty careful here. And now I'm gonna press M to reveal my mask, all right? And now I'm gonna make this subtract, okay? So now you can see there I did a terrible job. So what I wanna do is get in here really close and adjust this so that it's better, okay? Just so it's not an obvious end there, okay? And I'm gonna go kind of quickly here, but let me get in and actually do this other side as well. So I want to make a new mask, okay? Get up here and kind of just trace this edge. Oops, and I forgot to press that button, so I'm gonna hit undo. I made a shape layer, press the pen tool, select my matte layer, and press this button. I always do that, it's so easy to forget. Okay, so I'm gonna make another mask here that cuts right here, okay? And I'm also gonna set this one to subtract. Okay, great. So now this looks like this. So let me build the actual trim path animation now. So I'll press UU, and here's my trim path end. So let me set this back to 0, move 10 frames, make an end keyframe there, 1, 2, 3, okay? And now I'm gonna set this to 100. And additionally, I'm gonna put some ease on here, okay? Now, one thing about this method with the masks, you can kind of see how this is starting to work. The first half of it's good, okay? One thing about this is now I have to animate these masks off. So it's always really good to make sure that the animation is the speed and the length that you want it to be. In this case, it's fine, but when we get into the script, this is gonna be really important, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is press M to reveal my masks, okay? And I'm gonna make mask path keyframes, all right? Now I'm gonna press U, I'm gonna reveal all animated properties. Now what I wanna do with these mask path keyframes, okay, is make these into hold keyframes. This isn't something that I really want a lot of animation on, so these, I just wanna kind of hold the value until they move off for the most part. So I'm gonna Option Command click on these to make these hold keyframes, okay? And I'm gonna take these and I'm just gonna line them up with the start of the animation here, or I'm gonna try to, which is right here, okay? And yeah, these are all lined up now. You could put these anywhere, but I just like to keep them here at the with the first frame of the animation, okay? So now I'm gonna move forward, and the first frame that I need to move the mask is right here, okay? So let me get in a little closer. You can see that this has a leading rounded edge here, okay? And then on the next frame, it's now disappeared behind the mask, and you can tell because it's kind of straight there, okay? So what I wanna do is take my mask, and if I select it all, I'll select all the points. I just wanna pull this off, and yep, the line has now reached all the way here, so my mask is not necessary, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this, and remember, this is a subtract mask, so I don't wanna accidentally like leave it here, for example, because it will cut the shape, you know, as it moves past that. So what I wanna do is take this actually and just move this over here, which I call Siberia, okay? That's just outside of the edge of the frame, all right? So let's check in on our other mask now. And I moved it out here just so there was no chance it could accidentally subtract something, all right? So what's happening here with this frame, all right? So this one looks like it's not yet, this mask still needs to be here because this would have a rounded edge, okay, if that was the leading edge of the stroke. So let me go one more frame, and now I can see that leading edge is peeking out here, okay? So this is the frame that I want to move my mask, okay? I just want to move it over here. And again, these have hold keyframes, so they just hold this value until they move over there, okay? So now it looks like this. Okay, it's now time for me to animate something that's very much like your homework so that you can watch me. So I'm gonna animate all of these letters so that they're writing themselves on, okay? Obviously, which is what I'm gonna be asking you to do in your homework, all right? And also, this word that I have here, right now this is an Illustrator layer, okay? But this started as one of the fonts that we're gonna be giving you, which is called Gelato, all right? So if you wanna do something like mine, you can work on the Gelato one. Great. So when I look at this, basically at first, what I see are three separate pieces. Okay, I see an S and I see a W, and then I see this, which is all connected, which is E, E, and T. And if you really think about it, this bar that crosses the T, this might even be a fourth element, okay, that we have to put in later. But for now, I'm just thinking about this as three things: S, W, an S, a W, and then an E, E, T. Okay, so the way I would do this is, first I'm going to duplicate this layer just so I have an extra copy, and I'm going to call this S. All right, I'm going to turn this off, and I'm just going to work on the S first. And the S is going to be really easy because there's no overlap at all, right? So this is more like the tapered stroke that we just worked on, not the overlap one, okay? So I'm going to choose my pen tool, or G, and let me set this down to something like 15, okay? And now you always want to think about this before you start stroking anything, okay, is how is this writing on? Is it starting here or is it starting here? And you probably have to do this in the air with your finger. For me, I'm starting up here on my S and moving down, okay? Here, I'm starting here, and I'm going like this in a loop-the-loop, woot, there, okay? And then here, I'm starting here and moving across, and then I'm gonna move up, and then kind of like up, and then down, and then get this loop and get that, and then I'm gonna kind of move up and loop again, like with the W here, so this is up and over, and then there, and then finally stroke, okay? So, starting with the S, and I'm starting here, all right? Let's go. I'm gonna make a shape layer that I can mat this into, all right? I'll just try to carefully make my S as best as I can. And it's always a bit tricky. Alrighty. I think I want this to be something like this. Okay. This is already I'm fiddling too much. Okay, move this over there and pull this way. Okay, great. So let me keep moving here, and let me drop a point here. I'm just going to kind of talk to myself as I do this. I'm not the best with the Beziers myself. Okay, so great. So how about that? Let's see if that works. I'm going to go up here, and let me change this and make this thicker now. And that looks about thick enough. Can I adjust this? Nope, a little bit thicker. Okay, so always got to get it just right. And then I want to remember to make this a line cap and a line join just in case. And it looks like what I want to do is here, just pull this down a little so it's not touching that. Okay, great. So that is good. Let me call this my S mat. Okay, what I'm going to do is track mat this S into my S mat. Okay, now that looks like that. Great. Now I'm going to get up here, and I'm going to add a trim paths. Okay, and I'm going to move to frame 10 or something, just so I'm not right on the front frame. First frame, I should say, and dial my end back to 0. I think 20 frames is probably okay for this S, but let me put some E's on there, and let's check this out. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Now, one thing I will say is that E's looks pretty exaggerated in the terms of handwriting, so often, like, I don't think you should be pulling these at all like this, okay, because it'll really look kind of unnatural. I think almost like having this start a little bit faster, and then if anything, just the tiniest little bit more ease on the end there is probably what you want, okay? So just sort of like does come to a nice stop, and looks like it starts sort of quickly. I don't know, that's what I think anyway. Okay, so we've done the S, great. Moving on to my W. What I want to do is duplicate this, okay, and call this my W, okay, and for now I'm just going to turn the S off, and I'm going to put this on. And actually, let me find out where the keyframes are here, okay, and so I want to start around here, something like this, okay, and now let me make my shape for the W. Grab my pen tool, set this back to 15, okay, and I'm going to start here and stroke like that, right? So let me get in a little bit closer. Just try to go down kind of the middle here. These Beziers are always a little bit finicky. Okay, now here I want to go around the side. So I kind of want to make it like, undo that. So like here, kind of. Yep. And then this down kind of this side here. I'm exaggerating this a little bit. I know that when I widen this stroke out, it'll work better, okay? And then here, I'm gonna have this kind of go up here or something, and then finally kind of and here. Okay, let me just straighten this a little bit, adjust this. Okay, that looks about right. Let me widen this out and see how that does. Whoops, too wide. Okay, I want to widen this a little bit more, something like that. All right, that seems to be covering everything. Yep. Okay, yep, and let me pull this. Ooh, okay, well, I might have to deal with that a little bit. Okay, great. Now I don't want this touching the E. Okay, great. So this I'm going to call my W mat. Okay, and I'm going to take my W and I will just pick whip, track mat, pick whip up there, or I could have pulled this down to W mat. Okay, so now I see this in all of its glory and only that. Okay, so let me take my W mat and I'm going to twirl this down and add a trim paths. Okay, and my S ended around here, so what I'm going to do is make my first trim paths end keyframe here. Okay, and I move 20 frames or so. I can always adjust that later. Copy and paste this, and I realize I need to make this 0 at the start. Okay, and additionally, I'm going to put some E's on here. So let's see what those look like together. Oh, right, let me just see my W. Okay, and already it's starting to work pretty well, I think. You definitely have the feeling of that looping here as it loops around, but there's just some ugliness that we need to clean up, right? So it's pretty good. Here, that's an ugly frame. And then there. Oh, and I forgot actually to set this to rounded. Okay, so that actually would make a difference here. So let's see what that looks like. Yep, it still looks good, but now it's got a rounded edge, which is a little bit nicer. Yeah, especially right there up top. Okay, cool. And I can see that I am just barely hitting that, just a little bit, so I'll have to fix that as well. Okay, but let's start with this line here. Okay, so this is a little bit tricky. What I want to do is follow this curve up here to like this point or something like that, okay? Yep, because this comes up, yeah, like there. Okay, so I'm going to start here, all right? And I'm going to remember this time, I've got my pen tool selected, but I have to press this to make a mask, okay? And I'm going to get in here, and this is definitely going to be a little bit tricky. I'm going to make a mask point there, and I'm going to kind of go up here and try to pull this so that I'm kind of moving along this line here and then ending around there. Okay, and actually let me move one frame up. Now that'll be fine. Okay, and then actually what I want to do is option click on this so I can only change one Bezier point. All right, and then I'm going to click here and here. And I think now if I press M, this now is, I'll set this to subtract, okay? And that should be good. Let's see. Yeah, it comes up and then, yeah, that's gonna be good. Okay, now I wanna work on this for a sec here, okay? So let me make sure I press this button to, that's right, make a mask, okay? Get in here and try to just really get close without quite cutting this and see how this is. Great, make this subtract here. Okay, so this should be all right. When this animates, it'll now look like this. Yep, pretty good. All right, so that's pretty good. And what I'm going to do is press M and reveal my masks and make mask path keyframes. Now press U. Okay, I'm going to select these both and I'm going to option command and click on this to make these hold keyframes, and I'm going to put these lined up with the first keyframe. Okay, and then where would I need to actually change this? The first frame is here that I need to adjust. Okay, and this is for this mask. All right, so now if I take my mask away temporarily, okay, I can see that this isn't quite, I still need something that kind of like cuts right along here as well, because the mask has advanced to right there. I mean, the animation of the layer, the trim paths animation, okay? So I want to delete this, okay? And this is going to be slightly tricky. I'm going to make I'm going to choose my pen tool and add a point somewhere around here. You can see as I hovered over the edge, I get that plus. That means I'm adding another point, okay? So now I'm going to take this. The reason I did this is I kind of want this angle to be uninterrupted when I do this, okay? And I just want to kind of pull this down here. I kind of got a lucky guess there that would be like a really good place to put that, but I might also option and drag this down to see, okay, well, not quite. What I want this is this to cut this like right there. So this is actually not bad. I think I could probably live with this as it's only gonna be on screen for like one frame, and it still has a pretty rounded edge. So it would look like this, and then this. we'll see if it bugs me. Let's see if I pull this way. I guess I want to pull this more like this way, so it's got that kind of an edge. Yeah, I think that works. Okay, so basically I'm just like getting in here and I'm animating this mask now. Okay, rather than pulling it off, I'm animating it there. But then I think on the next frame, now I should be able to grab this, take all my mask points at the same time and move this off. And yeah, that has now disappeared in there. So I can go over here and put this over in Siberia with what will eventually be all of its friends. Okay, and so now, so just in case that's not clear, this looks like this. Right? It's probably pretty close to that. Yeah, so that's looking good, but what we need to do now is figure out when this next mask comes off, okay? So select that, and now that selects all my mask points, and this is not ready to come off because this would have more of a rounded edge. You can see that it's really close here. So I'm gonna delete this, and what I wanna do now is kind of just, again, select this keyframe, which will select all of the points, all right? And now I kind of want to pull this back and figure out, all right, so this is kind of around here, okay? Let me do a little bit of surgery on this, all right? So I'm going to set this one here, take this point and put it so that it's here, okay? Then I'm going to take G for my pen tool, and I'm going to put another point right here, okay? And I'm just going to pull this out a little bit so that I can create like a curve right there, all right? And then I'm going to take this and this point and just pull these in. Okay, what I want is this to have a rounded edge right here, okay? Just sort of faking the edge, okay? So, I don't know, something like that. Okay, and then I can go one more frame, and now I can just take this whole thing and move this off to Siberia with its friend over here. They're having a little party over there. Okay, so now I've got this back. So this looks like that. All right, so let's see what this looks like, the W. Okay, now I do have this one little thing right there that I need to fix as well, but that looks really good, right? You really get the feeling that it's writing on by hand, okay? Whew, good. So let me fix that one little point, which is right here, okay? And what I'll do is I'll go back to the beginning. Actually, no, I lied. I'll go here where I can see it, okay, and get in here, press G for my pen tool, again, press this button to make a mask, and just mask this off really quick, okay? I'm gonna make this subtract. All right, so then let me twirl this down, make a mask path keyframe, option command and click on it to make it hold, pull this back to the beginning where the other ones are just for the sake of neatness, okay? And where does this disappear? It disappears here, okay? I don't think it's touching right here. And just to make sure I can pull this a little bit this way, okay? And then here, I think now if I pull this, oh no. So I could do that, okay? It was still kind of there, just a little bit, and now finally, obviously, whoops, I can select any of these points, and now if I move this, I'm pretty sure that is now, yep, done, so I can go ahead and move this guy over here, that's right, to that place where all of their friends are. Okay, so now this is now done. It looks awesome, okay? So what I'm gonna do is twirl this down, and let me put my S on as well, okay, and push the work area back to the beginning. And let's look at those two together. Yeah, you can really see the illusion is starting to work. And it's so funny. It just doesn't look like anything particular is happening. It just looks so easy when it's all done, okay? So another thing that we could talk about here is that I can have a little bit of overlap, okay? So the S is kind of like coming to a stop, and it's basically done like here, okay? So I could create a little bit of overlap by pulling this back so that the W is kind of starting right as this ends, or even maybe one frame before, okay? And note, when I move the trim paths keyframes here, I have to move all the mask keyframes with it so that I don't lose the relationship there, right? But now that's just sort of jumps on the end of the S a little bit better, and I kind of like that more, right? SW, awesome. Okay, great. So I've got my W done, and now it's time for me to move ahead to my EET, all right? So close all this down and actually turn off my S and W for a sec, and let me duplicate this again just in case I ever need another copy. Here I've got my EET, all right? And I press U here. All right, so this is where this ends. Okay, so I close this up. And now I'm gonna make another path using my pen tool, all right? And I'm gonna set this down to something like 15. Okay. Right, so again, you gotta think about the way this works. I'm gonna have it start here, then this, okay, then I want this to, so this is kind of like moving up, and then this here is kind of moving like this way, so I want this to kind of come up and peak, and then move down and move around here, okay, and same with here, I want this to do the same thing as the W where this loops around, okay? And then we'll deal with this T stroke at the end, we'll figure out what we're gonna do, all right? So, so I deselect this, all right? So I'm gonna start around here somewhere. Okay, I'm just gonna go for this. All right, cool, so great. Yeah, got that going. And let me go ahead to make sure to remember to make this line, rounded edge, okay, and round join. And now let me widen this out, okay. Too wide. Remember, you just want this to be as thin as it can get away with being while still covering the whole thing underneath, all right? So I think that's about okay. Let me see now if I can adjust this just in small ways to cover that over. Okay, and just trying to see if this is actually the right width here, and I just want to be careful with this. All right, looks like I need to make it a little bit wider. Just so, let me pull this way. Okay, and yeah, so this is actually really like that. All right, so just make it a little bit wider. This should do it. Okay, cool. Nothing's really touching too badly here or here, so I think that's acceptable. All right, great. And let me call this my eat mat. Okay, and let me go ahead and track mat this into the eat mat like that. Okay, and that's disappeared. And this is looking pretty good. All right, so I'm gonna take this and I'm going to add a trim paths like so. And let me go ahead and animate this real quick, starting at 0. Okay, I believe this was the frame. Yep, so I'll go over here, make an end keyframe. Now, how long to make this? Well, clearly longer than the S or the W, I think. If I just sort of write this in the air, it's like E, E, T. I don't know, that feels like maybe a second. So 1, 2, 3, groups of 10, so that's a second. Okay, so now I'm gonna set this to 100. And let me put the work area around this. And I wanna make this ease, boop. Okay, so let's check this out just like that. Da, da, da. Da, da, da. Okay, I want to make this a little bit longer. Da, 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 da. Okay, something like that. Now, actually, I don't want this to be ease, really. What I want, so now, okay, we got to think about this. I don't want a keyframe at the beginning and an end that's slow and slow so that it moves really fast through the middle. That's not the way a hand would write this, actually. What I want is this to write itself onto about here, okay, till where it reaches this point. And then I kind of want it to pause because it would go like this and then pause and then this and then pause and then that, right? So I want pauses in here. So I'm going to put those on linear first. So there's a pause about there. Okay, then the trim path goes over to here to the top. It's about there, okay? And I want to pause kind of there as well, all right? So right now this just looks the same, but if I want, I can now put ease on these, okay, and it would look more like this. But you can get more of a sense of the stop and start or fast and slow motion that I want, all right? So it's like E, E, T, all right? I think that's about right. I can always adjust that later, even though it's definitely a pain once I've made my masks, but I'm prepared to do it. Okay, so let me, speaking of masks, okay, let me do all this work that it's now gonna take to cut this out with masks, all right? So pen tool, press this button, okay, and what I want is a nice cap end of this, okay? So I'm gonna get in here like this, and like, get in here like this, and get a little bit closer, okay? And I kinda wanna this here, and like a point there, okay, and then a point like there, maybe. Okay, and just sort of even this out a little bit. All right, and then I just want to cut the rest of this off like this, okay? And press M, reveal my masks, and go down here to subtract, okay? So now it starts like this, right? Which is a nice way for it to start till it reaches here, okay? So what I'm gonna do is press M, select my mask path, make a mask path keyframe, and now let me press U, okay? And I'm gonna option command and click on this, okay? Move that over here, and here I need to do what looks like a little bit of an animation on this mask, so I'm gonna press my mask, my V arrow, okay? And there's the edge right there, okay? And it's like a little bit connected. So I could probably fake this just like that. That looks pretty good. So it went like that, okay? And then the next frame, I think it will be beyond this. So I could take this mask now and widen out. And now let me move this over here to Siberia. And, oh, it actually looks like, I don't know why it cut this kind of weirdly here. All right, so maybe I need like a mask for like one frame here just to make this look a little bit more even. Ah, what a pain in the neck. Okay, here we go. Go up here and grab a new mask, choose my pen tool, select this layer, okay, and press this to make a new mask. All right, and this is gonna be simple and quick. I'm just gonna kind of make a quick mask that goes like this. And what this does is it just cuts off this ugly part of the end here. I don't know quite why it looks like that, but I want it to look rounded, so I'm gonna subtract that, okay? And let's see, I'm gonna twirl this down, make a mask path, make this hold, go back here, okay? And then this frame, I don't need this anymore, so I will widen out, and if I select this path, I can now grab all these points and move it over here. Okay, so just in case that's not clear, it was just like this, okay? Right, so now that's pretty good. So now the E would look like this. Right, so that's good. Okay, so let me close these two masks up and move along. So I now need to fix this. So let me make a mask here to cut this and this here. Okay, so yeah, that looks a little bit janky, but you know, I'm taking a long time here and I don't want to like take forever, so I'll pull this down a little bit more like that. You just really want to make sure that these are as seamless as possible, okay? So that looks a little bit better. I'm gonna make mask path keyframes here. I'm gonna make them hold. I'm gonna stick these back to the beginning, okay? So now when do I need these? I need this here, okay? So it looks like I need to do a little bit of animation on here. Can I just pull this down? Yep, pull that down, so that's like that. Next frame, let's see, maybe now I don't need this mask anymore. Yep, okay, great. So I'm gonna widen out and drop that over here. Okay. Cool, so now let me see if the other mask is needed at this moment, or what's happening there. It looks like it is still needed there. Okay, so let me go one more frame. Yep, now it's obviously not needed. Okay, so let me widen out and put this over there as well. Great. So now this looks like this. Yeah, and you can really feel that nice little pause right there. Great, I think that looks really awesome. So let me work on my T and bring this all home. All right, so, all right, the T is a little bit complex for sure. It kind of like comes up here and then hits this point here. And then basically the next frame, you can kind of see that it started to loop around again. So let me go here. And what I want to do is kind of draw a mask with my pen tool, G, okay, and make sure that I'm drawing a mask, right? That sort of goes like here and then kind of gets that right there, okay? So it's gonna like follow along here like this, get a little closer, okay? And then kind of zoom up and come out around here. something like that, okay? And then I'm gonna go around here and I'm gonna definitely make sure to include this part of the T-bar and whatever little bit of the T that is over there, okay? And let me go ahead and make this a subtract mask. And I will go ahead and make a mask path keyframe and make that hold and drop that, oops, and drop that back at the start with the others, okay? And while I'm here, let me make the mask on the other side, okay? So let me select that button again, okay? And this one's gonna go up here and kind of cut all this off. So here, okay, get a little closer. And let me kind of cut this like this. It's not bad, hopefully, okay, like this, okay, and let me make this one subtract as well, and let me make that mask path keyframe, and make it hold, and drop it back here. Okay, so now that looks like that, which is pretty silly, right? It comes up here, and then this next frame is when it loops back over, okay? So let me select my mask 5 keyframe here, which just in case it isn't clear, when I do that, what I'm doing is making sure that I'm selecting all the points on the mask so I could just move it individually, move it as a whole rather than an individual mask point, okay? So when I move this off, yep, I see that that's cutting that right there like I saw before. So what I wanna do is, I wanna keep this line here very steady the way this is cutting right now. So instead of like trying to move this and get that back into place, I'm gonna put an additional mask point on it, okay? And hopefully then, like if I put a mask point here, hopefully then I'll be able to take this down and just use that kind of like that, okay? To make that little section there. All right, so this goes like this and then that, okay? And now I'm gonna grab that mask keyframe and that's selected all the points on the mask and then I'll move this off, okay? And that, oops, I need to move one more frame, okay, and move this off. Okay, so now that's down there, kind of, right? So let me undo, and what I'm gonna do is make a mask point here, okay? And that allows me to pull this down and just kind of put that there, right? So it's really good to like see in advance where it's all going, right? Okay, so that is like this and then this. So just in case it's not clear, this is this side stroking down now, okay? And so I'm sort of emulating the rounded edge there. Okay, so let me go one more frame. And let's see if I need this mask anymore. Nope, I do not. It's going now down here into this, okay? So that's complete, but I still have all these parts to cut off. So I'm actually gonna undo that. I'm just gonna use this mask, what the heck. I think the best way to go is just sort of put this like here temporarily, okay? And just sort of stick this here. Take this guy and drop him over like there. Just want to cut that bar off as best that I can. Okay, and then pull this over. Right now this is cutting into my E over here, and I do not want that. So let me move these points over. Great, so that's cutting off those two things now. So it just went like that and that, okay? Just basically recycling the mask. All right, so that's good. This mask doesn't need to change. So let me select this now and see where we're at on this side. Okay, so that still looks like it's being cut and I need the mask there. So let me go one more frame and it looks like the edge is there. So I guess, oh, actually, All right, so here's the edge of my stroke and it's ever so, this small amount is still sticking over the edge. So, okay, what I'm gonna do is use this mask up here to just keep cutting off that T-bar, okay? So grab this point and kind of just put that there, and let me get a little bit closer. And I'm gonna grab my pen tool again and just convert this to a curve and convert this to a curve, okay? Just so I can adjust these a little bit better. I think that looks good. Okay, no it doesn't. Let me just pull this over a little bit more. Up like that. Okay, that should be better. Great. And now it looks like I just need an additional mask to deal with this annoyance right here, okay? So I got my pen tool selected and let me select this layer, okay? And press this button to make a mask. Right, and let me just go here and just kind of click this, I don't know, like this. pull this more. Oops, I didn't mean to complete the mask. Just pull this, darn. Pull this, select that, and pull it down like this. Okay, and let me now make this a subtraction mask. Boop, great. And let me make a mask path keyframe. Make that hold, stick this back at the beginning, and I'm pretty sure if I go to the next frame, yeah, I'm not gonna need this now. So let me widen out and move that over to the big party happening in Siberia now. That's like a huge party. Wow, it's like a total rave over there. Okay, cool. So I think this T is now done, except for the T bar, but that should be good. Yeah. You really feel that pause at the top of the T now. Yeah, that's really sweet. Okay, cool. So let me make this T-bar and let's get out of here and be done. Okay, so let me rename this Eat and then turn that off. And I'll just call this my T-bar, TN bar, bar. Okay, cool. And this is really easy because the rest of the word has already been written on, including the T and this E and stuff. So I could just make a very simple stroke and trim paths it, and this should like work really easily. All right, so get in here and make my shape like this. Yep, that looks pretty good. Oh, and I'll make it rounded on the line cap. Okay, let me call this my T-bar mat. And let me get in here and add trim paths to it. Boop. Oh, and I'm going to track mat this to my T-bar mat, right? So now this looks like this, but everything else is already on here. Well, oops, I have to go to the end here, right? Which reminds me, where is that last keyframe for this? Okay, it's right here. All right, so this is where I want my first trim paths end 0 keyframe to be, right? And it's just gonna do this, right? And I don't need to mask it at all, which is nice. And let me do like 10 frames or something. It's probably longer than it needs to be. Let me check it out. I'm gonna put some E's on here real quick, F9. And I think the way that this would work is you sort of start moving the stroke kind of quickly. So I'm gonna push this back a little bit, and then I would just have a nice little ease at the end. So let's see what that looks like. Yeah. The only thing I would say is maybe we can adjust the timings of all these keyframes now. Like I could possibly move this back like 1 frame. Let's see that. Yeah, I love it. It looks awesome. Okay, so now let's go back to the beginning. Select all, collapse everything down, press B to set the work area to the beginning, and then let's watch the whole thing. Yeah, that's awesome. It's always amazing to me how effortless it looks once it's all done. Yeah, anyway, awesome. That's super sweet. Okay, well, this turned out a little bit longer than I was hoping, and I'm sorry about that. But it was such a packed lesson that I think it was totally worth it. I know that you learned a ton here in particular, and let me just review this. So we talked a lot about shape layers, both parametric ones that you make with a button, as well as shapes made with the pen tool. And I also told you about hold keyframes and track mats, which are both super important and useful. Finally, I showed you how to animate script type on screen so that it appears to seamlessly write itself on. When you get a chance, go ahead and check out the exercise video in which I go over your homework. Thank you so much, and I will see you there.
What happens now?